Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Salming, the Associate Content Editor of Occupational Health and Safety Magazine. Welcome to today's webinar presentation titled Workplace Violence Prevention, a Total Organizational Effort. Our sponsor for today's webinar is BSI Consulting. Our speakers today are Tony Pelly, Carrie Green, David I. Blacksburg, and Jay Priest. Tony Pelly has over 10 years of experience conducting security risk assessments for clients. As the director of the BSI Security and Resilience Consulting Team, he helps clients design, implement, and refine their risk mitigation programs to improve security. He has worked in over 30 countries and spoken at industry events and universities and has been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, The Telegraph, and Business Insider. Carrie Green has 32 years of experience as an EHS regulator and consultant. She works extensively with public entities in projects and outsourced capacities to cities, special districts, and counties, including acute care hospitals, behavioral health, first responders, and code enforcement. She is an enthusiastic trainer and EHS program and team manager. She has a background in Cal OSHA compliance, emergency preparedness, workplace security, de-escalation techniques, and violence prevention. David I. Blacksburg is an accomplished leader with over 20 years of experience in emergency management, business continuity, and process improvement, developing best practices for regulatory and accreditation compliance and incident preparedness, response, and recovery. He has provided thought leadership to senior leaders and community partners to ensure quality and consistency in planning efforts. David has held numerous roles in the command center, leading efforts during large-scale incidents such as Superstorm Sandy, widespread blackouts, and the COVID-19 response. Previously, David served as an EMT for FDNY for over 9 years, where he responded to various disasters, including the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. He holds a master's in public health from New York Medical College and is a certified business continuity professional from Disaster Recovery Institute. Jay Priest is a consultant for BSI with over 35 years of experience in security and law enforcement, where his extensive knowledge spans several environments, which include healthcare, government, aviation, nautical, manufacturing, and community safety and enforcement. Jay is a highly effective manager and trainer who holds a master's degree in criminal justice with an emphasis in education in conjunction with experience in healthcare, security, law enforcement, training, personnel, leadership, and many other facets of the security industry, including operational management, administration, technology systems, project development, and implementation. Now, before we get started with today's presentation, I want to quickly address 2 housekeeping items. If you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, click on the Help button located below the side window and you will receive technical assistance. After this event today, you will receive an email containing a link to an archive of today's presentation so that you can go back and review it or share it with a colleague who might have missed it. Okay, with all of that being said, it looks like we're ready to kick off today's presentation, so I'll hand things over to Tony and David. Tony, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Alexandria, and thanks everyone for attending the webinar today. My name is Tony Pelly, Practice Director for Security and Resilience at BSI. Before we begin, just a brief disclaimer. The opinions expressed in this presentation regarding workplace violence trends, issues, and solutions are solely those of BSI and the guest speakers participating in the webinar and do not represent the opinions of any other organization, group, or individual. This is a big topic, and we feel that this is just the beginning of a discussion on the subject in a quick 1-hour format. Our BSI subject matter experts are ready and willing to engage in further workshops, webinars, or individual discussions and guidance based on attendee interest and feedback, so we would love to hear from you about the subject of today's webinar. So I'll give a quick introduction and background. We'll then throw it over to David for risk analysis. We'll go to Carrie for program development and data, David again for mitigation and response strategies, Jay for training, and then Carrie will close out with a path forward. But first, just a little bit of background on workplace violence. So what is workplace violence? It's the act or threat of violence ranging from verbal abuse to physical assaults directed towards persons at work or on duty. It can involve the unlawful violence or threats of violence, and the results may be a physical or psychological harm. I think we tend to focus a lot on the physical harm to people in the workplace without focusing as much on the psychological harm that can result from workplace violence as well, and that will be a focus of our webinar today. So there's a few different types of workplace violence as well. And again, we tend to focus, I think, only on strangers with criminal intent or potentially co-workers, but there are cases as well where workplace violence may spill out of the workplace itself and involve customers or personal relationships where the offender has a relationship with another employee in a business or organization, or it may be perpetrated by a customer or somebody else who has some sort of business relationship with the organization. Unfortunately, this is a hot topic because workplace violence has been increasing significantly over the past few years as these statistics bear out. There's been an increase in the number of fatalities. There's been an increase in the number of active shooting incident locations and incidents themselves over the past few years that unfortunately contributes to a rising trend of workplace violence of all different forms, as we've discussed, across different types of workplaces and across the country. So a few different reasons why you want to prepare for workplace violence. Most importantly is you're creating a safer environment in terms of mental and physical health for your employees. If they feel like they are safe, they will be sort of better participants in the workplace, better employees, and their mental health and physical health will be better maintained. There's also important reasons why you would want to have a workplace violence program in place to avoid liability and litigation, in addition to the reputational impacts that it could have on your business. There's also a patchwork of state regulations and requirements now that require you to have some form of workplace violence training or program in place. And the bottom line is that your simple sort of one-page program related to workplace violence that doesn't include any training, may not just be enough anymore, given the increase of incidents that we're seeing and given the proliferation of these types of incidents across different types of workplaces. So as you can see on this slide here, there's a number of states primarily on the West Coast, but also on the Midwest and East Coast that now have workplace violence laws and requirements in place. We would encourage you to look at the requirements for your own workplace, wherever you may be based. So a key part of workplace violence is doing effective preparation and compliance. So we're going to look at risk analysis, sort of surveying locations, job positions, and the risk of violence in those different locations. How often are they interacting with other employees, people outside of the workplace, customers? We'll then look at ways to develop a program, how to identify the proper policies, strategies, and training that are already in place that could contribute to your workplace violence program. And then steps you can take to implement the most effective program once you've surveyed the current environment. Lastly, we want to look at incident reporting and investigation. So how are we reporting on incidents? Are there incidents that we may not know about that we can surface and then begin to address? And also look at awareness and training. So how do we share the information about our prevention program and the knowledge that we've gained through our risk analysis, program development, and incident reporting processes? So right now I'd want to hand it over to David, who will contribute on the next section related to the first portion, which is risk analysis.
Thank you. Workplace violence is industry agnostic. It can and has taken place in all work environments, locations, and time of day. When reviewing risks, you can begin by developing simplified groupings. This will help you and your team to understand vulnerabilities and further develop mitigation strategies. It's important to understand physical controls and access, as current and former employees will be familiar with the environment and gaps in security measures. Administrative controls are just as essential as the physical. Former employees may be granted access by colleagues who may not be aware of a termination, or the former employee may still have an ID that permits them access. As we continue, some questions to keep in mind include, do you have an established program? Have all employees been trained and provided an opportunity to practice their roles and responsibilities? Risk factors for workplace violence will present differently based on your work environment. As Tony had mentioned earlier, there are 4 types of workplace violence groups, though there are commonalities. 2 categories include the environmental and the behavioral. When we speak about the environment, we want to review the boundaries of your infrastructure, review the locations where the work gets done, and what makes the area unique. Over recent years, we have seen a shift back to in-person work environments. The transition of seeing and working with colleagues through a computer monitor to being in close physical proximity can cause some strain on the human emotion. Stressors of everyday life, from money to health, will have an impact on those around you. Now that we have discussed some elements around workplace violence, we can begin to learn more about potential impacts. To start, select a risk matrix that works for you. What works for your organization? Once that has been completed, you may begin to conduct a risk assessment, which allows you to evaluate the hazard. Then minimize the risk by adding or strengthening mitigation and control measures. This is an example of a risk matrix. Here, we will list out in detail the type of hazard or workplace violence, understand the risk for each, and what administrative and environmental controls are already in place. Mitigation will help reduce the likelihood and/or the severity from an incident. In a little while, we'll review some specifics around mitigation controls. Here are some examples of findings from BSI's risk analysis and security survey services. Finding these gaps in a proactive manner can ensure corrective actions are taken before an incident occurs. Periodic reinspection and survey can help organizations maintain safe environments in dynamic atmospheres. Findings can be shared across the organization for awareness and to reinforce workplace security responsibility on all staff. And now, if you can please take a moment for a poll.
Okay, we're going to start with the first poll question. The first poll question is, how complete and up-to-date is your workplace emergency plan? A, very complete and updated, B, partially complete and updated, or C, not complete or updated. Throughout this presentation, we are going to have 3 other polls, and we would love your feedback and involvement. It looks like we have some responses coming in, so I'll give everyone just a few more seconds to reply here before we share the results and continue on with the webinar. Okay, let's take a look at the results. So it looks like 43% of you said that your workplace emergency plan is very complete and updated, while 43.9%, slightly more than very complete and updated, responded with partially complete and updated. A total of 12.8% said that their workplace emergency plan is not complete or updated. So now we will move on with the presentation.
Tony mentioned the national and state programs that have workplace violence prevention standards, most targeting healthcare and social service workers. One example state program is California's Regulation for Violence Prevention in Healthcare. This is a prescriptive standard requiring a written program, incident logging, reporting, detailed training, risk analysis, incident investigation, and corrective actions. That is a lot packed into one program. It also reflects a regulatory trend that includes employee groups in program development and evaluation. One way to bake in these processes and build a culture that acknowledges and addresses workplace violence throughout the organization. Implementing this standard was a heavy job for healthcare in California, but the work put into the development has given us many great case studies and best practices that we can share and can be applied to other organizations. Cal-OSHA is expected to roll out a general industry standard affecting all other workplaces in California. We're also seeing trends toward a federal regulation. These will be slightly less prescriptive than that healthcare standard that I mentioned. Once you know the people, locations, and work tasks potentially affected by workplace violence, after performing the risk analysis steps mentioned by David, you can begin to build your program out. Pull together your organization's units that hold the different pieces of facilities, technology, and policy. Using your teams for threat assessments, who's that going to be based on their roles? That way they can address when incidents arise and respond when incidents occur, heading off incidents before they happen, making sure the organization does respond appropriately after an incident happens. You identify who in the organization needs to take program steps to prevent violence by listing your stakeholders, their specific responsibilities and contributions to your efforts. Talk about the facility, technology, communication, and policy that have prevention pieces in them so that employees in the organization know the who, what, when, where, and how of your organization's prevention efforts. In-person training, online training, job aids, and drills all fit together to create that awareness and that competence into these prevention efforts. When we're talking policies and procedures, there is a general anatomy of a program. So what you see here, starting simply with your organization's purpose and policy for the workplace violence prevention program. You can then identify the scope, who is affected by the program. Generally, in workplace violence, it's everyone in the organization. Next come those specific responsibilities we talked about. Who is going to do what? How this can be based on assignments, expertise, resources that are available. So for example, facilities maintains the physical buildings and campus. Security may hold the keys to surveillance and communications. Safety office may maintain the program documents and training responsibilities, while HR can implement those employee assistance programs and also facilitate confidential co-worker interactions. And then, of course, providing information and benefits on employee assistance and any other type of follow-up after an incident. Existing procedures and new procedures can be documented in the program and added to over time as your organization evaluates the program effectiveness and what needs to be changed and tweaked based on what's happening in the organization or new information. So the program holds a place for you to document all of that. Also, some information on your training delivery, the level of training that different employees may get based on their risks and exposures. And finally, that incident log. Let's talk about that piece because it's the cumulative data for the organization and is going to help tell the story of where incidents are happening and what those characteristics are around them. For incident reporting to be effective, it needs to be an accessible and reliable system so employees can use it without fear and in a timely fashion to report their experiences of workplace violence. You want to build your incident reporting log in a way that lets you gather specific metrics to understand what's happening in the organization and where. For example, a narrative report is important because you want to hear in the employee's own voice what happened about an incident, but you also may want additional details that you query the individual about so you get not only gather that perspective but also those specific details around the address, the work and job task that was happening, the level of training, the job description that the incident occurred to, so that you get the full characteristics of each incident. So these details will help you identify the facts of what's going on in the organization, not just the perception. One thing to note is this data can be sensitive and at times confidential. So how you house it and share it is a factor to consider so that you can communicate what's happening, but also respond and respect any confidentiality issues. With complex organizations, lots of moving parts, people, and location, having one unified reporting system with common questions allows you to examine the details of the incidents that are happening organization-wide and benchmark them against each other. So this allows you to compare actual incidents and risks against that fear and maybe perception of what the risks were. And it's also a key way to examine incident investigations and their follow-up. Maybe what worked in one unit can be used as a solution in a similar unit, or even elevated to an organizational solution throughout the different facilities, the different locations. With reviewing incident data in real time, as well as trending, maybe monthly, periodically, annually, you'll get some insight into what is actually happening. So sometimes workplace violence isn't happening where we expected. You may think it's happening at your customer counter, but your data is actually showing that it's in the warehouse or the laboratory or the locker rooms. One thing we do need to be aware of this data is there may be some information we need to evaluate further. So for example, if we have incident data showing a lot of weapons involved, maybe the perception is these weapons were used, but your actual data may show, yes, a weapon was involved, but it was just observed or displayed. And we do have a case study with that information that there was a very large fear around weapons in a healthcare organization. And as they were looking at the data over time, they came to find that the actual weapons that were used were walkers and milk cartons. So while other weapons were present or observed, those were the actual threats occurring in the facility. One other caveat with data is workplace violence is known to be underreported. So with estimates between 40 to 60% of incidents not being reported. So just because your data is indicating violent incidents in a certain location, warehouse versus your front counter, one additional step you may want to take is to evaluate that difference. Check on the awareness and training of those customer service counter employees, making sure the message to report and respond is getting to them, and evaluating following that up over time. We do have a case study to share with some large healthcare organization that we worked with. They had 5,000 employees, an acute care hospital, and multiple satellite clinics for public health and behavioral health. Their challenge was when OSHA created the Workplace Violence and Healthcare Regulation in 2016, they had a lot of moving parts, a really complex organization to help deliver compliance to this regulation. So BSI held stakeholder meetings to make sure we had representatives from all of those different units to explain what they were already doing, figure out what policies and procedures they already had in place, and then identify the responsibilities at the higher levels of the organization and within the units on how the violence prevention was going to take place. We then created a training to communicate that information to all of their staff. So instructor-led and online training was created to make sure that it was available and convenient to all of their staff. And rolling that out helped to make the awareness of the new regulation and how the organization was going to apply it. BSI also facilitated union involvement to make sure to share those steps to get feedback on the program, the training, and eventually the data analysis that was created through the accumulation of the reports. So the overall outcome was heavy involvement and awareness of the upper levels of the organization and all staff. That blitz of in-person and online training got everyone talking about the efforts in the program at once, making sure that reporting was encouraged, easily accessible, building in confidence that the report was going to be investigated and followed up. And then touching on that year over year, because now that program has been in place for 6 years, so that staff can see the progress. They can have trust in the system. And I would like to turn it over to our generous host, OSH.
All right, thank you so much for that, Carrie. On to our second poll question. Has your threat assessment program been evaluated or benchmarked independently? A, evaluated internally. B, evaluated externally. C, benchmarked or scored against other similar organizations. Or D, no evaluations of any kind. I will reread the question for this one. Has your threat assessment program been evaluated or benchmarked independently? It looks like we're getting some poll results in, but I'll still give everyone some time to reply before we share the results and continue on with the webinar. Just a few more seconds here to get your responses in. All right, let's take a look at these poll responses. It looks like our highest response is under the evaluated internally category, with 40.2% of you all responding to that. 39.3% responded that they have no evaluations of any kind. I want to thank you all so much for sharing your feedback on this poll. Now we'll hear from David.
Physical controls may also be described as engineering controls as technology is brought into the development. An example of this would be electronic badge readers for doorways or weapon detectors. As we continue the discussion of administrative policies, it's also important to understand the impact workplace violence can have on your employees, culture, and the organization. The emotional well-being, positive culture practices, and business continuity programs and plans all play a role in ongoing recovery. Some details around technological advances include panic buttons, digital record keeping, surveillance cameras, and advances in communication alerts. Mitigation is used to define a set of policies, procedures, plans, and processes that may be implemented and acted upon to reduce the threat. What are some of those risks we spoke about earlier? Performing or having someone not familiar with your facilities perform a vulnerability assessment will provide you with valuable feedback. This review should be performed at all locations. As previously mentioned, developing specific procedures and actions for employees is important. This works best if they receive training and are able to practice the expected actions. Do you have qualified and experienced trainers and compassionate trainers? Do you have specific training programs? If you commingle topics such as workplace violence, active assailant, active shooter, you will lose the message and the critical information being shared. The trainer will build a bridge of trust and knows how to customize to your specific industry and workplace environment. Experienced trainers know how to build trust and share expectations. A drill is only as good as the lessons learned and the detailed action items to make corrections. This is part of a continuous plan, do, check, act cycle. As we have seen through media outlets, these types of incidents do occur. It is for this reason we must discuss a response team for when, not if, this will happen. What specific training does your team have reporting actual or potential incidents, working with and coordinating with first responder agencies, and implementing de-escalation techniques? While the immediate response to a violent situation is dependent upon the totality of circumstances, individuals should be mindful of expectations when leaving the danger or hot zone of the incident, in addition to the consideration of post-incident actions. Workplace violence can be or escalate to a violent assailant incident with someone wielding or carrying a weapon. As a result of their hostile activity, law enforcement will be responding to with the sole purpose of neutralizing the threatening individuals. In doing so, law enforcement will be clearing areas while advancing towards the subject. In order to facilitate a safe exit, personnel should always follow instructions provided by law enforcement while remaining calm and keeping their hands empty. Personnel should also be prepared for law enforcement officers to possibly use low-level amounts of force to contain these areas during incidents of non-compliant behavior. Once all personnel have evacuated the physical building or location of a threat, it's important to maintain awareness of physical injuries as well as mental health. Both may not be immediately recognizable due to adrenaline and distractions of the event. Be sure to have a safe space identified before an incident happens. Maintain detailed records and have security video available for law enforcement during and after an incident for investigative purposes. We have seen too many of these incidents where employees may not return to the workplace or even to the company. Having an established program with a continuous improvement cycle works to identify improvements in policy and expected actions. When you conduct these assessments, it is beneficial to include all who were involved, as well as administration who can implement these updates. And now, if you can please take a moment for a poll.
All right, let's take a look at this poll. So the question is, which of these administrative controls has been implemented within your group? A, policies, B, behavior meetings, C, employee assistance program, D, positive culture practices, E, threat assessment and management, or F, preparation for active assailant. I'll read the options one more time. A, policies, B, behavior meetings, C, Employee Assistance Program, or EAP, C, Positive Culture Practices, E, Threat Assessment and Management, or F, Preparation for Active Assailant. Before we take a look at the results, I'll give everyone just a few more seconds to reply. All right, let's take a look at the results. It seems that our highest one today was Employee Assistance Program at 31.7%. The second one was Policies at 26.7%. And the third highest answer was Preparation for Active Assailant at 20.8%. It does look like a lot of these did get good responses, so we thank you all so much for that. And so now we will hear from Jay.
Thanks, Alexandria, and thanks to you for answering questions in that poll. As we have been discussing, developing your program and processes is an integral component to assuring safety, security, and perhaps most of all, confidence in your resources, staff, and team members. We all know that programs, plans, and processes are all great to have in place and are a necessity to help provide a safe workplace environment. Yet, what is the value of these tools if an organization is not providing the latest training and practical application for its most valuable commodity, their employees and visitors? To maintain organizational standards, it is vital to consistently provide an up-to-date and continuous training program for all employees on at least an annual basis. Additionally, managers need to be aware and confident with performing their leadership roles in the prevention of workplace violence, as these individuals are the critical element for success. The most effective method to prevent or reduce workplace violence is by implementing a prevention strategy, which utilizes robust policies and training, which not only help minimize workplace violence, but will also create an environment where employees feel safer because they are more confident and prepared for potential workplace violence incidents. While some of the prevention strategies will include being aware of potential threatening activity, it is also imperative to be attentive to the presence of typical workplace items which have the potential to be used as weapons. It's also important to be mindful of behavioral warning signs exhibited by others, such as a significant negative change in behavior by personnel within the organization. As an experienced security and law enforcement manager, I work closely with human resources and risk management to remain aware of individuals and/or events which have consisted of negative and escalating behaviors that affect the workplace. Often, these individuals demonstrate noticeable changes in behavior which can be addressed with minimal delay when observed and reported. While you may have already implemented some mitigation strategies and perhaps noted some new ones during this presentation, it is important for all employees to be aware of various response strategies and exit methods should an event take place. However, preparation through training should occur and remain consistent as part of an organization's due diligence to provide a safe environment. The reason we are talking about mitigation and exit strategies is that workplace violence presents itself in many forms. This includes an array of actions ranging from verbal threatening behavior to an actual active assailant with weapons such as a knife or firearm. We have discussed awareness of your work environment because workplace violence has a potential to take place everywhere within your organizational footprint, both indoors and outdoors. While the media commonly focuses upon incidents involving sensitive types of industries like education and healthcare, it has become clear that workplace violence is indiscriminate of industry types. This is demonstrated by incidents which have also occurred at federal agencies, non-government organizations, and all different types of private industry, as well as locations related to various intersectional groups. As in any significant emotional event, such as a workplace violence incident, an organization should consider a proactive approach to the future well-being of its employees post-incident. It is recommended that certain systemic mechanisms be in place and acted upon after the occurrence of a workplace violence incident. This consists of several essential steps in order to address any potential physical or emotional needs for the well-being of all involved employees. It is important to remember that mindful awareness, responsiveness, and empathy by all levels of leadership should be a priority, as it not only promotes employee confidence, it communicates that the organization cares about the well-being of all. The training type will vary with roles and responsibilities. For your general employees, this may be performed in a classroom, virtual, or through your learning management system. For managers, supervisors, and your response team, you may want to implement a hybrid program where they receive the general information through a learning management system, then an in-person review by virtue of a walkthrough of the work environment. The training for managers, supervisors, security, and your response team should also conclude with a drill or exercise. The exercise will provide an assessment on accuracy and appropriateness of the program and the processes, as well as the effectiveness of the training. Once you have finished the drill, you will want to bring everyone together for constructive feedback. Some of the questions you will want to ask yourself and your team are the following. Were training and practice sessions appropriate? What worked well and why? What are some of our gaps or opportunities for improvement, and how can we address them? In order to illustrate how to apply these aforementioned strategies, let's look at the case study. The client is a large organization that was required to complete an annual training for workplace violence prevention in order to meet safety goals, organizational accreditation, and regulatory requirements. The problem: commitment to training on an annual basis for multiple locations and work shifts created a high cost and time efficiency concern. Available off-the-shelf training content was not engaging nor considered to be effective by staff and management. The solution? BSI generated and provided a customized training program which delivered in-person sessions at various locations and launched an interactive online training with 24/7 availability. The training could be started, stopped, and resumed based on job demand. The program also consisted of custom photos, scenarios, and real-time incident data and outcomes that successfully engaged students due to it being focused on their work environment. Further, ongoing training evaluations solicited feedback and drove training content improvement. The outcome benefit? The training addressed staff needs for customer service scripts, individual behavior, threat risk analysis, and prevention strategies. Engagement with the training improved staff's confidence that they could recognize and prevent incidents and properly respond when incidents occurred. Now you have the basics of workplace violence training. Back to you, Alexandria, for our final poll.
Thank you so much for that, Jay. As Jay mentioned, let's take a look at our fourth and final poll question of this presentation. What type of workplace violence training does your organization conduct? A, drills, exit strategies, or response procedures. B, warning signs, surveillance, or reporting. C, role-specific training such as security, safety, or human resources. Or D, threat methods such as verbal, physical, active shooter, knives, blunt instruments, or drones. I'll give everyone a few more seconds to, I'll give everyone a few more seconds to answer, and then we'll take a look at the results together. All right, let's take a look at these results. It looks like the most commonly answered one was A, drills, exit strategies, and response procedures, with 37.2% of you responding. Interestingly enough, B and C, warning signs, surveillance, and reporting, and role-specific training all came very close. Role-specific training landed with 25.6%, and warning signs, surveillance, and reporting received a 21.8% response. 21.8% response rate. Thank you all for that. And now we will hand it over to Carrie.
So where do we go from here? We broke down the components of organizational efforts to prevent workplace violence. We want you to know the why of this important topic as well, beyond the regulations, beyond the news headlines. This effort will have a true and resounding impact on your workforce and your organization. When we're looking at prevention of workplace violence, it increases job satisfaction and performance for employees. They want to feel safe at work. They want to have confidence in their employer, knowing that the program's implemented, they're trained, everyone's practiced, and knows that if an incident happens, there's going to be a quality response and follow-up. This instills trust, and trusting safe employees have overall improved health and well-being, better productivity, good for the organization and the individual. They want to have that confidence in their employer that the work has gone in to prevent the violence through policy, procedures, facility improvements, and the knowledge that everyone knows their role in the prevention, the reporting, the investigation, and follow-up. This affects their overall health and well-being. A well worker is a productive worker, which is good for the organization and the individual. No matter where you are in the process, you can start to enhance your efforts. So even if you don't know where to start, we hope we've given you those steps. on pulling people together and having these conversations, getting some traction on the stuff that you already have in place. Start with what you know. Pull in those experts, those stakeholders that may have pieces of workplace violence prevention that you were unaware of, or maybe other units were unaware of. Take manageable steps and use that plan, do, check analysis of your data and of your program to drive future improvement. So doing something is better than nothing. Whether you are at the very beginning stages of your workplace violence prevention efforts, or perhaps you have had a mature, well-organized reporting, response, and analysis program going forward, there are times and places for you to improve that. So the hope is that we have given you the tools to take the initial steps you may need if you're just starting out, or mine your data, evaluate your program and resources to fully develop your workplace violence prevention efforts if you're already along that path. Thank you for joining us. That is all we have for you at this time, and I would like to turn it over to our generous host, OSH.
Fantastic presentation, Tony, Carrie, David, and Jay. I want to thank you all so much for that. It does look like we are out of time for today. Remember, in the next day or two, we will be emailing you a link to the archived version of this webinar so that you can view it again or share it with someone who might have missed it. Now, before we sign off, I do want to give 3 quick notes of thanks. First, I want to take a moment to thank our speakers, Tony, Carrie, David, and Jay. Thank you all so very much for sharing your time and expertise with all of us. Also, thanks one last time to our sponsor, BSI Consulting, for their generous support, which made today's presentation possible. And last but certainly not least, I want to give a special thank you to all of you who listened in and participated with us today. You're the reason we do this, so thank you very much for your interest and involvement. Okay, with that, we'll sign off. I hope everyone has a great rest of your week, but for now, goodbye until the next Occupational Health and Safety webinar.